Hi everyone, my name is Xisca Borrás. I'm a partner at Bristow's and I specialize in life sciences regulatory law.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hatzel. I'm an associate in the Life Sciences Regulatory team at Bristow's.
Earlier this year, the European Commission issued the much anticipated piece of legislation amending the MDR's transitional periods and the MDR and IVDR's sell-off dates. In this webinar, we will go through what the proposed changes are and what they mean both for the EU and the UK markets.
Let's start with a little background to that. The Medical Device Regulation, that's the MDR, and the In Vitro Diagnostic Medical Device Regulation, that's the IVDR, are intended to replace the EU's old medical device regulatory framework, which was implemented in a series of directives following a series of patient safety scandals in the early 21st century involving medical devices such as metal-on-metal hip implants and pelvic mesh. The MDR and the IVDR have introduced a number of genuinely revolutionary regulatory changes. Crucially, for present purposes, the MDR and IVDR have dramatically increased the level of scrutiny which is applied when a medical device undergoes certification by a notified body, and the level of clinical evidence which is required to obtain that certification. Now, once a device has been certified, it can be CE marked and placed on the market in the European Union. The MDR and the IVDR contain transition periods to allow existing medical devices certified under the old framework to remain on the market for a period of time. If the device is to remain on the market once the transition periods expire, it must be recertified under the MDR or IVDR before then. To date, there has been a disastrous lack of notified body capacity to certify existing and new medical devices under the MDR and IVDR.
I think it is fair to talk about a recertification crisis in the EU and the UK. What's this all about? Well, the transition to the MDR and IVDR has been difficult. Manufacturers are finding it extremely difficult to get their existing and new devices certified under the new regime. The reasons are multiple, but they are actually quite simple. The MDR and IVDR have created too much work with too little time to do it in, with not enough notified bodies. The figures are actually quite shocking. There's about a 700% estimated increase in workload for notified bodies compared to the previous regulatory regime. This is significantly due to the upclassification of most software as medical device and IVDs, resulting in the need to involve notified bodies much more often than before. We have roughly 30% less notified bodies under the MDR and roughly 50% fewer notified bodies under the IVDR to conduct certifications compared to the previous regime. And finally, transition periods, which are only between 3 and 5 years old, compared to certifications under the previous regulatory regime that accumulated over 30 years. The transitional periods are followed by a sell-off period of 1 year. Once that period expires, any devices which had been certified under the previous regime and which are still in the supply chain, that is to say, which are not in the hands of the end users, must be recalled. The sell-off period means that manufacturers cannot allow themselves more time to recertify their existing devices by stockpiling large quantities of stock before the transition period expires, because any unsold stock would have to be recalled after only 1 year. All of these circumstances together have created a huge crunch to recertify existing medical devices and IVDs in time, and thereby keep them on the market. They have also made it very difficult for any new devices to get certified and make it to the market. Different stakeholders like MedTech Europe, FBA, the European Cancer Patients Coalition, and others have all expressed serious concern over the last months and years that the MDR and IVDR could force existing technologies off the market and have a catastrophic effect on patient care.
And so, in the context of that, yes, frankly, a recertification crisis, along comes this new legislative proposal to fix the MDR transition periods. For a very long time, the European Commission was in denial about the existence of a recertification crisis, even as stakeholders have been advocating for a long time for the Commission to take action on this crisis. While the Commission was willing to postpone the date of application of the MDR and to extend the transition periods of the IVDR during the pandemic due to the obvious disruption that was caused there, since then the Commission has been particularly resistant to introducing another legislative proposal to amend the MDR and the IVDR to fix the present problem. The Commission finally conceded that action of this sort was needed on the 6th of December last year, and draft legislation to amend the MDR and IVDR transitional provisions was published on the 6th of January this year. In short, what this legislative proposal will do is extend the MDR transition periods for medical devices, provided that they meet certain conditions, but it won't extend the IVDR transition periods. The proposal will also extend the validity of existing certificates, and in some cases even bring expired certificates back to life for medical devices that meet certain conditions. But again, this won't be available for in vitro diagnostic medical devices. And finally, the legislation will remove the sell-off deadlines which exist under both the MDR and the IVDR. Of course, this legislative proposal is subject to change as it goes through the European Union's legislative procedure, albeit that's an accelerated co-decision procedure. There has also been a one-week public consultation on the effect that this legislative proposal will have. That has now closed.
Let's have a look at what each of the transitional periods or deadlines mean in reality for each type of medical device and the conditions that need to be met in order to be able to benefit from these transitional periods. Starting from the very top of the table that you can see on the screen, for custom-made Class 3 implantable medical devices, the proposed new deadline will be the 26th of May 2026, therefore given 5 more years on top of the current deadline that actually ended a couple of years ago. This is, of course, subject to the manufacturer lodging a formal conformity assessment application for the device by the 26th of May of next year and sign a written agreement with a notified body by the 26th of September of next year. For all other Class 3 devices, the current deadline ending on the 26th of May of 2024 will be extended if this proposed draft piece of legislation is passed and implemented as it currently looks like, to the 31st of December of 2027. For this to apply, the manufacturer must have an EU MDR compliant quality management system in place by the 26th of May 2024. Secondly, lodge a formal conformity assessment application for the device or a substitute device by the 26th of May of 2024. And thirdly, sign a written agreement with a notified body by the 26th of September 2024. The conditions that I have just described actually apply to all of the types of devices that I will comment on that are listed in this slide. So for Class 2B implantables, except sutures and others, the deadline move in the same way that for all other Class 3. So from 2024 to 2027. All other Class 2Bs, which include sutures and others, 2A, 1M, and 1S are moved from May 2024 to the end of 2028. And then for class 1s, we differentiate between two scenarios here. So medical devices that were class 1 under the old regime, but that are up-classified and therefore require the involvement of a notified body for the first time, given their up-classification under the new regime. The current deadline under the transitional periods was May of 2024, and the proposed new deadline for those products would move significantly to the end of 2028. Finally, we've got a second type of class 1s that were class 1s under the old regime, continue to be class 1s under the new regime. The current deadline for those has lapsed because it was in May 2021, and no proposal for changing that is foreseen under the proposed new transitional periods, and therefore no conditions can apply to those products given the situation in which they are in.
So we've talked about how this legislative proposal will extend the transition periods for certain devices under the MDR. Well as that, the legislative proposal will extend the validity of certificates issued under the old regulatory framework. And in some instances, it will even bring expired certificates back to life. So looking at the extension of legacy certificates first, the validity of those certificates for medical devices, but again, not in vitro diagnostics, will be extended to the end of the applicable transition period for that device, provided that the certificate was valid on the 26th of May 2021, and the certificate has not since been withdrawn. As the legislative proposal is currently drafted, the manufacturer will not have to take any action to benefit from that extension. It will be automatically deemed by virtue of the legislation. Meanwhile, legacy certificates which would have benefited from the aforementioned validity extension, but for the fact that they expired before this legislative proposal came into law, will be reanimated, brought back to life, and deemed to be valid until the end of the applicable transition period for that device, provided that the manufacturer signs a written agreement with a notified body for conformity assessment of that device or a substitute device, or a national competent authority has granted a derogation under Article 59 or Article 97 of the MDR to allow that device to remain on the market despite the fact that its certificate has expired. Again, provided that the manufacturer takes one of these steps, the reanimation of the legacy certificate will be automatically deemed by virtue of law without apparently any further action by the manufacturer.
Having gone through what the changes to the legislation are, there are some open questions. First of all, questions around the action on the IVDR or lack of thereof. The problems with the IVDR are arguably more acute than the MDR. The transitional periods for the MDR are now between 6 and 7 years long, but the transitional periods for the IVDR are only between 3 and 5 years. Yes, it is very positive that the sell-off period is proposed to be removed, but it's not transformative. We will have to watch this space as to whether further changes are implemented closer to the end of the transition period when it comes to the IVDR. The second big open question is what will happen in the UK? So the UK still recognizes, generally speaking, legacy EU devices. So the extension in the EU of legacy certificate should be great news for the UK market, and in particular, the Great Britain market. However, it is not yet confirmed that the UK will accept extended or reanimated legacy certificates once the legislation in the EU changes. It is our understanding that the Life Sciences Council and the MHRA are considering accepting FDA medical device approvals, Canadian approvals, Japanese approvals, Australian approvals. This won't take effect immediately, and we do not know the details, but in the next year or 18 months, this will hopefully be a reality, which again should be good news for manufacturers of medical devices and IVDs. There is a final point as far as the UK is concerned, which is the new piece of legislation that we expect to apply as from the 1st of July of 2024. Tranches of this draft piece of legislation are expected through 2023, and the most significant of the timelines that we are aware of is that the main draft piece of legislation is expected in the winter of this year.
Thank you very much for listening. We hope that this webinar has been useful, but if you have any questions about developments in life sciences regulation in the UK or the EU, you can contact us at the email addresses shown on screen now.